Hi there, welcome to Mr. Stewart's History Revision Guide. We are going to look today at Paper 1 Question 5. This is the essay question. It will usually give you a statement and then ask you how far you agree with this statement. This is worth a whopping 20 marks, it's 16 marks plus 4 specs, so it's very important. This video will look at how we structure our answer. I will give you a model introduction, one main model paragraph and a model conclusion, and I'll go through how I created those model paragraphs, then give you a couple of practice questions at the end. So here is an example question from the warfare course. It is the composition of armies changed a little in the Middle Ages. With the essay questions in paper 1, because they are worth 20 marks, I would give a lot of time to them. I would spend 25, maybe even 30 minutes, depending on how quickly you can answer the other questions in paper 1. And in that time, you should, depending obviously on size of your handwriting and the speed that you write at, somewhere between 1.5 and 2 sides. 2 sides I think is ideal. That's what you really should aim for. But 1.5 is okay for some people as well. So the key information, the key bits of information I want to give to you on how to answer this question is on this slide here. So I've highlighted in purple the key parts of the question. So it is vitally important. I'm sure you've heard it before. You must read the question properly, really understand exactly what you should be focusing on. So in this question we need to look at the theme. Now, themes in warfare, you have 4 different themes, what I call themes. They're weapons, the composition of armies, recruitment and training, and then the experience of civilians. If you mention things from a different theme for what the question isn't, you will get no marks for that paragraph or whatever you're talking about. So you must make sure, if the question like this one is on composition of armies, that is what you are talking about. Also, what you need to look at is the time period. This may seem obvious. It says Middle Ages. Clearly I'm going to talk about things in the Middle Ages, but the amount of students' answers that I've had to read and mark where for some reason they start talking about events in different periods, again, you will get 0 marks for anything mentioned outside of the Middle Ages. So make sure you focus on the period in the question. The last one, and it is really, really important, is what is the skill focus of the question. So here I've highlighted in purple the word little, because that's the skill focus. It's talking about what is the extent of change in relation to this question. Now, with paper 1 essays, usually you will either get, how much change was there, or what was the most important reason for causing change. This question is obviously looking at the extent of change. So they're the 3 key things that you need to focus on. The fact that it is an essay question means that you should have an introduction and you should have a conclusion. I would recommend only writing 3 paragraphs. I wouldn't write any more as your main paragraphs. I don't feel you have the time. I would also recommend that you use the bullet points, the guidance in the question for 2 of your paragraphs. You don't have to. It does say you may use the following in your answer, but the exam board have provided these, so you know that they are definitely correct. So if you do know about them, if you feel you can talk about them, I would definitely do that. It then does say you must also use information of your own. You cannot get more than 11 marks if you do not include information that's different to the bullet points provided. So it's absolutely right. You will be capped at that point. So you must have that 3rd paragraph about something else. With this question, it isn't just about providing knowledge and what you can remember and factual information. It is also, you must make sure, and I've written it in big bold letters here, your focus must be on whether you think there had been much, a lot, or little change. That is what the question wants you to concentrate on. How much change has there been? Do you agree that there's been little change, or do you disagree and think there's been a lot of change? Okay, moving on, I'm going to give a model introduction, one model paragraph, and then a model conclusion, showing how I would approach and tackle answering this question. Introductions in general shouldn't be too long. They aren't hugely important. If you're running out of time, you can skip the introduction. It doesn't matter hugely, but they are quite nice, and they do make it easier for the examiner to know what to expect. All introductions, regardless of whatever question you're doing, can follow these 3 clear steps. 1, brief setting of the scene, or just very general, vague points about the time period or the theme that is mentioned. Then list your 3 key points, the points that you're going to make in each of your paragraphs. Then give a clear judgment on whether you agree or disagree, and to what extent as well. That is it. That is simply it. Now, before I show you my model introduction, with this question, I am going to use the 2 bullet points, and then the additional one for my own knowledge that I'm going to talk about is the change from hand-to-hand weapons to longbows. Okay, so here's my model introduction. There we go. Now, I've broken it down into the 3 different sections. Please don't write it as 3 different paragraphs. It should be together as 1 paragraph. I've just broken it down this way to make it easy for you to see how I wrote this model introduction. So have a look there. I've in red, and then there's your sentence starters. You could probably use them, or depending on what the question is, use them for any introduction. But you can see I've just for number 1, again, it's just very sort of vague general points about composition of army in the Middle Ages. In point number 2, I state the arguments that support the statement. For example, the similar size of armies, but then say the arguments that challenge the statement. In this case, the use of dismounted knights, and that my own knowledge paragraph, which is the change in infantry weaponry to longbows. Then you can see it's very small, just 1 sentence at the end saying, this is my judgment, I mostly disagree with the statement. I don't need to explain exactly why or for what purpose or whatever. That can come in my conclusion. Okay, here is a model sort of main paragraph, and I've highlighted it and labelled it accordingly to point, evidence, explanation and link. What I would like you to do, you can pause it and you can read it through, but what I really want you to look at is just how the focus is on the explanation, and look at how much I've written in my evidence and how much I've written in my explanation, because one of the things that a lot of people do is they spend too long just spewing out as much information that they know about the topic rather than explaining and answering the question. So if you look at the explanation and the link combined, that's about half of the paragraph in total, which is a good amount. The question you're wanting to be explaining, not describing, so you want about half of your paragraph as an explanation or linking back to the question. So here I have my point. One reason that challenges a statement is that by the end of the Middle Ages, knights primarily fought dismounted rather than horseback. Very simple. Your point should always be nice and clear. It should just be 1 sentence. I've then provided good, factual, specific information with certain dates of battles to back up the points that I'm making. I've then clearly explained, well, look, this is a change that was significant, it wasn't little, and I've clearly, with my link, addressed and linked back to the question saying, this therefore shows that in fact the composition of armies changed significantly over the Middle Ages, which challenges the validity of the statement in the question. So that's the kind of structure that you're looking for in your paragraphs. Again, make sure you're focusing on explaining rather than just providing factual information. Now, conclusions are always areas where I feel students make lots of sort of basic errors, and they kind of don't really feel that conclusions are that important, and they maybe write a sentence, whereas the conclusions are probably the most important paragraph in your essay. You can definitely pick up a lot of extra marks from having a good conclusion. And the key to writing a good conclusion is two things. You need to compare and prioritize, and that's compare and prioritize the three arguments that you have just talked about, that you've just written. Don't just simply repeat the key points. There's no point you just rewriting the main points that you've made in your main paragraphs. That doesn't add anything new and therefore won't get you any more marks. What you need to do is evaluate how strong those different arguments are, or how weak those different arguments that you've laid out and presented are. And essentially just your thought process. When you've had to decide what extent you agree with the statement, you will have had a thought process in your head about whether you agree or disagree and why. And your conclusion is essentially just explaining that thought process. Why were you more convinced by the arguments that challenge the statement than those that support it? Just explain that. Remember, compare your different points to each other, prioritize your points. So here's my model conclusion, and I've highlighted the areas where I sort of kind of do those kind of things, and I'll just quickly go through that with you. So in conclusion, I mostly disagree with the statement. I highlighted that because that is what I said in my introduction. You must make sure that you are consistent throughout and your introduction and your conclusion match. I then go, I accept that the size of armies was relatively the same. So that is showing that that is a strength of that argument, and saying, well, yes, this is true, that this shows that there was little change. However, I then go and highlight a couple of weaknesses about this argument. For example, there was this Battle of Towton, where it was a much more significant, it was, 25 to 30,000 soldiers on each side. That is way bigger than any battle at the beginning of the Middle Ages. So just looking at that one battle, that doesn't fit the model of the fact that the size of armies changed the same. Not only that, but the main reason why they didn't change that much was because of the Black Death, where a third to half the population was killed smack bang in the middle of the Middle Ages. So I feel that that is the main reason why they didn't get gradually increase over time. So that's made me sort of think that that argument is a bit weak. Then, if you see where I say the use of the longbowman I am more convinced by the arguments challenging the statement. That's kind of linking, that's kind of comparing the argument of the size of armies to the argument of the use of longbowmen by English infantry. I say that was a significant change. I give evidence from some battles, and I show a strength of the argument by saying it was because the English armies were so successful. I then say I believe that is the most convincing argument. That is always a good thing to do. So this is my most convincing bit of evidence. And at the end, I link that the increasing use of longbows by infantry to the fact that made knights dismount, and so that links there together as well. So you can see I've prioritised which reason I think was the most important, and I've made links during my answer. I do hope that has helped a little bit in understanding exactly how you would go and tackle one of these questions. Here are a couple of questions that you can try. Please do go back through the video, looking at each different stage, looking at the advice given, and use that to answer either these questions here or other questions that you want to do. Thank you very much.